There are two ideas about Purim, which I think they don't get too much attention, but I think they're worth thinking about. They're like, when they tell you that a tree has roots and the roots go down and spread as far as the branches above, it's hard to believe. No, it's on the underground. You don't see it. One is the question that the Gemara asks: why don't we say Hallel? By Hallel, I mean Psalms 113 through 118, with the special duplications. Why don't we say Hallel on Purim? We say Hallel on all the holidays except for Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. And the Gemara asks about Rosh Hashanah and Kippur and says, if the books of life and death are open, how could the Jewish people be saying Hallel? But Pesach and Shmooze and Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, and Chanukah, we say Hallel. Why don't we say Hallel on Purim? And the Gemara gives three answers. One is that this miracle took place outside the land of Israel, to which the Gemara immediately objects, but so did the exodus from Egypt take place outside the land of Israel. So did the clouds of glory, which accompanied us on our trip through the wilderness, take place outside the land of Israel. So did the giving of the Torah take place outside the land of Israel? And the answer to those questions is that it was on our way to Israel. It was part of what brought us to Israel. So the centrality of Israel in the miracle is still there. But the miracle of Purim didn't have any obvious relationship to what happened years later. We rebuilt the temple and some came back. The second answer is that the miracle of Purim is incomplete. As the way the Gemara puts it, we are still the slaves of Achashverosh. We're still in exile, subject to a non-Jewish king. Even though the miracle brought us from death to life, but it left it incomplete, because life without having our existence in Eretz Israel, now let's be clear, is worth it. It's worth it. We shouldn't take the wrong position that if you don't live in the land of Israel, your Judaism is worthless. We shouldn't take the wrong position that if you're not free from external control, your Judaism is worthless. That position has been taken in the past, and it is rejected by the Jewish tradition. Heroes of Masada, notwithstanding, if they all committed suicide, the way Josephus says, in order to avoid being captured by the Romans, and being captured by the Romans meant only the loss of the control of the land of Israel and the loss of a free, self-determined life, if that's all they were escaping, then they were wrong. They were wrong. After all, the Babylonians preceded them by centuries, conquered the Jewish armies, took the whole population off to exile in Babylon, subject to the Babylonian king. That generation didn't commit suicide. So they say there's no such idea. So that's not what was driving. But if the miracle takes you from death to life and still leaves you in an exile and dominated position, that's not the kind of miracle that you say Hallel on. That's the second explanation. Yeah.
Do we say Hallel on Chanukah?
Yes, all 8 days, every day.
Why? We didn't go from, it wasn't a complete Geula either.
Sure it was. Because there we were living in the land of Israel, and there was Greek domination and control over the temple and over the culture, and we chased them out. That the problem was only a spiritual problem, and we solved that spiritual problem completely. Good thought, but in this case it's not accurate. So the third explanation, which is the one that I want to focus on, is that we do say Hallel. Only the text of Hallel on Purim is different from the text of Hallel on the other holidays. The text of Hallel on Purim is the Megillah. That's how we say Hallel on Purim, by saying the Megillah. To the extent that one of the Talmudic commentaries, the Meiri, says, if you don't have a kosher Megillah to fulfill the mitzvah of reading the Megillah, you should say Hallel. The day needs Hallel. There's a preferred text for Hallel, a preferred form of Hallel, and that's the Megillah Esther itself. But if you don't have it, then you should say regular Hallel. Now, I don't know anybody who takes that as a halacha, but the idea is that you are doing the Hallel, but doing it a different way, because this holiday demands that it be done in a different way. Now, what's the difference? Why would this be the preferred way of doing it? Why not do it the way we do it on all the other holidays? So there's a Gemara which says, anyone who says Hallel every day is like cursing God. Anyone who says Hallel every day is cursing God. We have special days in which we say Hallel: Pesach, Shmooze, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, Chanukah. If someone wants to say it every day, it's like cursing God. Well, that's like many Talmudic statements. It's not self-explanatory. What's so terrible about that? He wants to say Hallel every day. Okay, the Rabbi said to make a blessing, and he shouldn't. But let's say it doesn't make a blessing. The Gemara is not talking about making a blessing in vain. That's not its issue. So some explain the issue is this: Hallel is said on open, visible miracles. That's an event which anyone with a fair mind, fair, unbiased mind, can look at it and say, this is divine agency. And when I say with a fair, unbiased mind, that's not idle. There was a famous philosopher of the 20th century, Alfred Jules Ayer, British philosopher. One of whose parents was Jewish. I keep forgetting to look up which one. And he said, if I had witnessed the revelation at Sinai, I would have gone to the nearest psychiatrist, because that would have proven that I was crazy. That's an open, unbiased mind, hey? No matter what you see, no matter what you experience, if it violates your principles, it's got to be wrong. And if you see it yourself, then you must be crazy. But it can't be right. That's what he said earlier in his life. Later in his life, I was in London at the time when he had a near-death experience, and he came out of it, and he said, in that experience, I saw things that I didn't think were possible. My philosophy wouldn't have made room for them. And since I'm an empiricist, I believe what experience teaches you, I have to rethink my philosophy. I thought, here's a guy, he's 80 years old, been preaching a philosophy his whole life, and he's willing to rethink it because he had an unexpected experience. I have to give that credit. That's something you have to honor. Most people aren't like that. Anthony Flew did the same thing. He was a very famous atheist. At the end of his life, he changed his mind and publicized it, wrote a book about it. Anyway, so the idea that's expressed is that a person who says Hallel, the Hallel that is dedicated to open, obvious miracles, and says them every day, says Hallel every day, what he's communicating is the only thing worth celebrating is open, obvious miracles. That's when God acts. That's when God is present. But everyday life according to the routine, that's when God is on vacation, so to speak. He lets the world run on its own, and therefore there's nothing to celebrate. Well, that's wrong. Divine providence operates all the time. Like the Ramban says in the end of Parshas Bo, famous Ramban, from the open, visible miracles, you learn that the rest of life is also miracles, but they're hidden. So we get an idea now that one has to have a kind of two-dimensional mind. You have to see things in two distinctions. First of all, don't let the open miracles control your vision of divine activity to the extent that when the rain falls, or when you get your paycheck in the mail, or when you have to turn up the heat, that this is not God's presence and God's activity. It all is. But on the other hand, there's a difference. There's a difference between the two. The regular Hallel is set aside for celebrating the open, visible miracles. And when you're not dealing with the open, physical miracles, then you don't say that Hallel. Okay, now, Purim comes in as a kind of borderline case. Because on the one hand, it is miraculous. We spoke about this when we went through the Megillah. The circumstances at the end of the Megillah are so unnatural, so unusual, so inexplicable, that they demand their explanation in terms of some kind of intelligent agency that's manipulating the events. They're not the sort of things that happen by accident. But each of the events, if you don't take into account the sequence and the trend and the dovetailing of the events, each of the events is not the earth splitting open and swallowing up Korach. It's not stones falling from heaven on the soldiers of the city of Ai. It's not the sea splitting. It's not God revealing himself at Sinai. It's not the plagues in Egypt. They're not miracles like that. We spoke about the idea of miraculous manipulation and focusing of otherwise natural processes. That we spoke about even in the plagues in Egypt. Here, even all the more so, it's processes of history which often are unpredictable. So here you have a gray area. It's miraculous, but not the open, spectacular miracles. Should you say Hallel or should you not? Now, that the three opinions of the Gemara, the first two say we don't say Hallel. Their position is you don't say Hallel. They seem to see things in a kind of one-dimensional way. Hallel is for open miracles. That's what you celebrate by having this performance of Hallel. And if you don't have open miracles, you don't celebrate. The third position is more subtle. That doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't mean it's better. It just happens to be more subtle. That you are saying Hallel, but you're saying it in a different way, because to celebrate it by saying the regular Hallel, at least under normal conditions, would be the wrong thing to do, because it's not that kind of miracle. So you say it by reciting the Megillah. Now, the Megillah, as we pointed out, doesn't have God's name in it. And to a certain extent, it looks like ordinary, unguided history. And it starts with the Chashverosh and ends with the Chashverosh. It's almost as if it's simply telling a chapter in the life of this non-Jewish king. I mean, it's sort of disguised in that way. And what the third opinion is telling us is reciting the history, but knowing in your mind that the inner force behind the history could also be a celebration of that kind of miracle. Yeah.
How could it be that second opinion with how, if you're reciting the Megillah, first of all, it's one person who's saying it. Obviously, he has to be skilled in the laning. It's like a special type of melody. How is it that one person can be yotze the whole tzibur in the, so to speak, Hallel of the reading of the Megillah? Like, isn't that like everybody has to do the mitzvah for himself, right? Just like Hallel.
No, I don't think so. Usually, mitzvahs of speech, we have a rule, shomea ka'ona, that if the one person is speaking and other people listen and have in mind that his speaking should count for them, then they satisfy their obligation. What happens to the Friday night table? One person makes kiddush, everybody listens, and that's it. It's over. Not everybody makes kiddush for himself, unless it's Hasidic, but okay. It's certainly perfectly appropriate not to do that. No, and the way the Megillah works is exactly that way. That it's the mikveh, the mitzvah is to read. The bracha is al mikra Megillah, not the Shmoa Megillah, al mikra Megillah, right? And then, but he reads, and he has a mind to do it for you, and you have a mind to participate in his reading, and then his reading counts for you. So that's not really so surprising. I'm trying to think now. I believe the same is true with Hallel. Maybe some of the responses, Hogel Hashem Kitov Kinun Chazdo, have to be said, but all the rest of it, if you don't know how, and you don't have a text, then you could be also listening to the Chazan. I believe that's true. Okay, so now what this tells us is that we spoke about this when we learned the Megillah, that the one function of a miracle is to teach you about the non-miraculous, that the non-miraculous is also divine providence. And I think the point here is to encourage a person to look around him and pay attention to what's happening to him in his everyday life, to see and we become so dulled We talk about coincidences. Wasn't that a funny coincidence? So I was, my wife has a group of friends, and I was speaking to them, mentioning this point, and one of the women told my wife, this was on Wednesday morning. On Thursday morning, it happened to her. What happened? She cooks for Shabbos on Friday. That's what she always does. This week, she decided to cook on Thursday, uncharacteristically. There are deep freezes on the porch. She goes out in the morning to get the food to cook for Shabbos, and she sees that everything's defrosting. Somehow it's switched off, and everything's defrosting. But since she went out Thursday morning to get the food, not Friday morning, it was still frozen, and she saved all the food. Okay, but then what about the freezer? So they call a repairman in. He looks and he looks. He says, doesn't see anything broken. Not quite sure what to make of it. And then they decide they'll plug it in and try it. They plug it in and it works. He can't explain why it turned off. He can't explain why it came back on again. She said, I made up my mind to cook one day early for Shabbos. That saved all the food, and the freezer's not broken. So you see that, you don't say, oh, wasn't that a lucky coincidence? But wake up and realize that sometimes Kadosh Baruch Hu shows you something. I had such an incident, maybe I've had 2 or 3 such incidents my whole lifetime. The one that I was so vivid to me, it was the week of 9/11, and I was on my way from United States from Israel to the United States. So I was taking the joint flight. You take El Al to London, and then you take Virgin from London to New York. So of course the Virgin flight was delayed. I had to stay over Shabbos. I was reinstated Sunday morning. So I took the flight to America, and I was there for several weeks. And I had the Virgin flight back from JFK at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I'm one of these people, if the flight is at 9 o'clock in the morning, I get there at 6. Okay, maybe it's a little, paranoid. I get there at 6. Fine. Take a taxi from Brooklyn. It's still dark. Get there at 6. I get out of the taxi with my bags. Look around. There's nobody there. Not only that, but the hall is dark. There's nothing on the signs. Nothing. Zero. What's going on? What is this? I didn't have a cell phone. So 5 minutes later, a car drives up. Young man is driving the car. And I see a teenage girl in the back. He stops and he says, are you here for the Virgin flight? I said, yes. He said, it's been moved to Newark.
Wow.
Oh, it's moved to Newark. Aha. And I had no way of accessing the information. I didn't have email where I was because in those days. So I said to him, so he says to me, would you like a ride to Newark? It's like 6:40 in the morning. He was taking his cousin to the flight in Newark. And he lives in Far Rockaway. And he thought, JFK is right here. Let's take a trip over and see if anybody's there. Is that crazy? That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. At 20 to 7 in the morning, he decided to take a look. And he wouldn't let me pay for the bridges.
Wow.
He stuffed me into the car. It was a small car. Sat the front seat with my knees under my chin, and he took me straight to the airport. Now that's really out of this world. That's something which really shouldn't happen. Something got into him. I'll go and I'll take a look and see if somebody's there. Just when I needed him.
Wow.
So I've been ever grateful for that. Kodesh Baruch Hu. Now, I'm grateful for it. Let me tell you something which the Kedushas Levi says about miracles. I think he says it in his writings on Purim. This is also very important. I want to tell you 2 attitudes towards miracles, 2 ways to relate to miracles. And I'll do it by telling you the same incident, which is now a fictional incident, in 2 different ways. I was in the river, and there was a sudden undercurrent which pulled me, and I was going under, and I couldn't fight it. I was not able to fight it. I was all alone. There was nobody there. And just that moment, a bolt of lightning hit a nearby tree, the tree cracked and fell right in front of me, and I grabbed onto the tree.
Does that happen to you?
No, I said it's fictional. This instance is fictional, right? And my life was saved. Now, that the bolt of lightning hit the tree just when I needed to be saved, that's not natural. That's certainly not natural. That has to be a miracle. And I have to say thank you to the one who saved my life. I'm saying thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Creator who saved my life. That's one way to tell the story. Here's a different way to tell the story. I was in the river, and I was dying. I was going under, and a bolt of lightning hit the tree, and the tree fell over right in front of me. Now, that couldn't have been natural. It was too connected to what was happening to me. It means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed himself to me. He showed to me that his providence is surrounding me. Not everybody gets that. Not everybody has an open demonstration that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is present and caring for him. And I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he showed it to me. He showed it to me. The real thing I'm grateful for is that he showed himself to me. Oh, yes, I almost forgot to tell you. And as a matter of fact, my life was saved. That's also true. Yeah, that's true, yeah. But what moved me, what generated my experience was the fact that he showed his presence to me. That's two different ways to take the miracle. Is it the result you focus on and trace it back to God as the cause? Or is it the fact that he showed himself to you miraculously, that's what you focus on? And the result, yeah, my life was saved. That's true. That's also true. It's also true. And I'm grateful for that. But that's not what moves me. What moves me is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed himself to me. Didnt Levi, who's a great Hasidic commentator, makes this distinction. Of course, the second way of taking the miracle is much higher. I believe that this Didnt Levi could explain a Rashi in the Gemara Megillah. The Gemara Megillah says that, I think we mentioned this, may have mentioned this when we learned the Megillah, that they accepted the Torah a second time on Purim, because the first time they accepted it at Sinai, God held the mountain over their heads, and there was an element of coercion, and here they accepted it again without any coercion. So that was like making up for the imperfection of the first acceptance of the Torah. Fine. So Rashi says they accepted it me'avas hanes, out of love of the miracle. Now, if love of the miracle means that God saved their lives rather than their being dead, okay, I hear that. But that's also not very exalted. That's not very noble. You know, it's better to be alive than dead, no question about it. Right? But if the emphasis is like what the Didnt Levi says, Kodesh Baruch Hu showed his presence to us and we see his providence. If that's what it was, then loving that miracle, the fact that the Kodesh Baruch Hu showed himself to them, that would be a motivation for accepting the Torah in a much higher way, a much nobler way. This is sort of re-entering that relationship of mutual interaction and concern, rather than just, he did me a great service by saving my life. So anyway, that's the idea of saying Hallel on Purim, or not saying Hallel on Purim, depending on which terrace you take, and how you should look at your own everyday lives. That divine providence is surrounding us whether we see it or not, and on the times that you see it, it's something to be very grateful for and to acknowledge. People who have miraculous salvations from death make a celebration every year. Not only that, but when they pass the place where the salvation occurred, there's a blessing to say. Blessed are you, Hashem, God, King of the universe, who did a miracle for me in this place. So these things should be celebrated. That's one thing. The other thing is this. We had 2 months of Adar this year. So the question is raised in the Gemara, which month of Adar should have the celebration of Purim? And there are two thoughts. One thought is, don't push off celebration of happy things. Don't delay it. Why should you wait till the second Adar? The other thought, which you know from experience is the one that we adopt, is that Purim celebrates a salvation and Pesach celebrates a salvation the two should be together. Right? But you put the two salvations together. Yeah. Why? This is like the aesthetics of a Japanese garden. This sort of looks better together. There's got to be something more to it than that. Now, what I told you before is part of the answer. Since the salvation of Purim is incomplete, that's one of the reasons given for the fact that we don't say regular Hallel, because they went from death to life, but they were still in exile, ruled by a foreign king. Pesach completes it. Pesach is from being in exile, ruled by a foreign king, to the freedom to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which then led them to the land of Israel. So if you look at Purim as incomplete, Pesach sort of completes it. That would be a reason to put the two of them together, to see them as related in that way. There's something else going on here, which is even deeper. Now, I must tell you, I've gotten to the point where I don't always say what I said, what I didn't say. I don't remember whether I said this or not. I don't think I did. I think I saved it to the end. Pri Tzaddik has a division of the year into two halves, each half having a certain character. There are two ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to the world. One is called Isarusa Delayla, where he initiates the relationship. He does something to break into our world, into our lives, into our history, and then our job is to respond. And sometimes we initiate the contact, and he responds. Now, I want to say right away what my Rabbi Zatzal used to tell us over and over again. The contrast isn't as stark as it may sound. Because there's a pasuk in Eov, Mihikti Mani Bershalem, who came before me that I should pay him for what he did for me? Who came before me that I should pay what he did for me? So, in the second description, where we initiate and God responds, it sounds like we took the initiative and we initiated. So we deserve credit for that. Listen, came from our side. So Rabbi Zatzal, he may have been quoting somebody, I forget, said, you didn't really initiate, because the inspiration to look at things that way, the framing, as the psychologists say, framing it in a way to see it as worthy of initiation, that came from God under the table, so to speak. It's a kind of hidden initiation. But it isn't as if you are really the origin of it. You're not creating from nothing. Only God creates from nothing. You're creating from what's there. So, and he brought a riot to this, because there's a Gemara that says, every day a voice goes out from Har Chorev, Oi to the father whose children are not at his table, Oi to the children who are not at the table of their father. Meaning, this is a complaint, so to speak, from on high. God is complaining, expressing his pain that his children aren't with him. That's expressed in many different places. So the Rabbi Zatzal said, what good is a voice that no one hears? It's like the tree that falls in the forest, which they make a big deal out of, which is really nonsense. Any 6-year-old can figure it out. Right? If the tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, does it make a sound? It doesn't make a sound. What a profound question. Right? Either you're talking about sound waves, in which case it does, or you're talking about somebody's conscious experience, in which case it doesn't. End of story. But okay, so he asked, what good is a voice which goes out and nobody hears it? And he said, the neshama hears it. The neshama hears it. And when you have a sudden inspiration, yeah, that's what I'm doing, but I could do better. A sudden yearning to pick yourself up, to move, that's your soul hearing that voice. Then when you move and you initiate, you're initiating on the strength of that inspiration. And that inspiration is coming from God. But that's not called an initiation. Initiation is an overt act. So you still have a sort of grand classification between where he starts and where we start. Now, the Pri Tzaddik said, if you look at the calendar of holidays, you'll see that in the spring and early summer, that's Pesach, Purim, Pesach, and Shavuos, that's where God initiates. And we react. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the fall and early winter, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, And Hanukkah, that's where we initiate. The year is divided into those two concepts. And that's why, another reason why, a deeper reason why Purim and Pesach are connected, because they're expressing one flow and one idea. Now, let's just take a look at the holidays and see if we can observe the differences between them. In the case of Purim, as I told you when we studied it, the name of the holiday, usually the name of the holiday is the great salvation, the great success to celebrate. Purim, the lots that Haman threw, that's what we're celebrating on Purim. That was the salvation. Says the Pri Tzaddik, yes, because throwing those lots, which issued in the decree, scared the Jews to death, and that's what woke them up, and that's what triggered their repentance and their turnaround. The Gemara says, "Gedolah Saras Atabas, min Neviah Son Shel Memchas Nevim v'Sheva Nevios." Greater was Achashverosh taking off his signet ring and giving it to Haman than the prophecies of 48 prophets and 7 prophetesses. Because the prophets all said, do tshuva, improve, repair the failures. And they exhorted the Jewish people over and over again, and they didn't listen. When Achashverosh took off the ring and gave it to Haman, they listened. To their credit, they listened. Okay, so then it means that the Purim are the engine of the salvation. Only you have to look deeper to see it, and the salvation coming from above. Salvation coming from above. On our own, we didn't realize it, grasp it, and make use of it until it was life or death. Pesach, as everybody points out, that the Jews who were there didn't deserve to leave. They didn't deserve the Exodus. Even after 80% died in the days of darkness. And I used to think, until recently when my Rabbi corrected me, I used to think, well, okay, those who were incapable of getting the message of the plagues and incapable of rising to the challenge of leaving Egypt and receiving the Torah and so forth and so on, they died in the 80% in the 3 days of darkness. Now, the ones who are left, they're the ones who deserve it. But as she pointed out to me, the famous midrash where the angels complain to God and say, why are you punishing these and saving those? These serve idols and those serve idols. That was said after they left. That was said at Yam Suf. So, and somehow, although they aren't functionally serving idols, after they left Egypt, they weren't bowing to statues. But the stamp of idol worship was still there. It hadn't been corrected. It hadn't been elevated. It required a longer divine process to pull them out of it. And indeed, the night of the Cedar, when the firstborn died, and the firstborn of the Jewish people were protected, and we actually left, they were given a glimpse of a glorious future which they had not earned. And then came 49 days of working to earn it on their own, which means that night they were given a vision of greatness, which was a pure gift, something that they couldn't justify. It was an investment in their future. It wasn't justified by what they had done prior to that. So this is in spades. And this was the La'ela, where Kadosh Baruch Hu said, they're my people and I'm taking them out. I'm taking them out. Justify it by what they'll do later. What they'll do later. God said to Moses, when Moses asked them about that, when you take them out, you get to this mountain, they'll serve me on this mountain, that's why I'm taking them out now. So it was all chesed, all an act of kindness, investing in their future. Shmooze is just the upshot of Pesach. It's the end of the count. Receiving the Torah at Sinai. Receiving the Torah at Sinai was the end of the Exodus process. So much so, again, I'm quoting my Rabbi Zatzal, on Pesach, when we have the special prayers for Pesach, for 7 days, we have a title for the 7 days. It's called Pesach, it's called Zman Cheruseinu, the time of our freedom. Now, in the Hebrew language, there are several different words for freedom. Chofish is a word for freedom. Shichru is a word for freedom. Cherus is a word for freedom. Cherus is a special kind of freedom. I can do this briefly. Let me ask you a question. If I make a law, the law either says you must do X or you mustn't do X. Have I limited your freedom?
Yeah.
For sure. Because certain options you don't have. If I say you mustn't do X, X is lost as an option. If I say you must do X, then other things you might have done instead, you have to put them aside to do X. Every law limits freedom. But some laws, in addition to limiting freedom, also create freedom. Let's take, for example, the laws of chess. We're playing a chess game, you and I. Middle of the game, I take my knight, and I march my knight 3 steps straight forward, and I take off your queen. 1, 2, 3, off! And you say, you can't do that! I say, sure I can. Watch, I'll do it again. 1, 2, 3, off! And you say, but it's against the rules. Yeah. So it's against the rules. So, nobody tells me how to move. I'm a red-blooded American. I move as I please. Yeah, okay, right? You move as you please, but you can't play chess. You can't play chess. If you move as you please, you can't play chess. The rules of chess make possible a certain activity called playing chess, and only if you play by the rules do you have the activity of playing chess, otherwise you don't have it. So you say chess is just a game. What's the importance of that example? I'll give you a much more important example. There are rules of language. If you don't obey the rules of language, you don't make sense. If you don't make sense, you can't communicate. Communication is pretty important, right? It's not just a game. To a great extent, your life depends upon communication. And here comes the red-blooded American again. Don't tell me how to talk. I talk as I please. And plus blue. That's how I talk. Okay. You can talk like that, but you can't communicate like that. The rules of language determine what sounds coming out of your mouth communicate, and what they communicate, and what don't. So there are rules which create freedoms, in addition to restricting freedoms. The most simple case, the least sophisticated case is drive only on the right-hand side of the road. So 50% of the road is against me. It's off limits. I've lost 50% of the road. Yeah, but what you gain is the ability to go someplace. Because if everybody can drive wherever they want, no one's going to get anywhere, right? So now, the idea of calling freedom cherus is related to the word charus, spelled exactly the same way, which means engraved. You engrave something on rock. It's there permanently. Charus ala luchos, the 10 pronouncements of Sinai were engraved into the tablets. Rabbi Zatzal said, when on Pesach you say Zman Cherusenu, that should trigger you to think ahead to Shavuos. That's where you're going. The freedom you have is going to the place where you get the engraved stones. And the engraved stones have the laws that make you free to live a life that's a godly life, to live a life in touch and contact with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's what it enables you to do. Without that, you can't do it. So really, Shavuos is the upshot of Pesach. In rabbinic language, Shavuos is called Atzeres. Atzeres means to hold back something that might dissipate, something that's been created from before. That's the spring and early summer. It's all what HaKadosh Baruch Hu initiates. When you come to the fall, Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvah is to blow the shofar. You probably know that we don't wait until Rosh Hashanah to blow the shofar. We start blowing the shofar a month early. Start blowing it at the beginning of Elul. We blow it for a whole month. Because we know it's coming, so we initiate. Now, I'm not sure the Sfardim do that. But there's another thing. And that is, all the Sfarim say that whatever the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is supposed to do, it does it because it's accompanied by tshuva. So you have to ask yourself, how did the tshuva get there? How is the tshuva there to be accompanying the shofar? So you say, well, do tshuva on Rosh Hashanah. For almost everyone, that's out of the question. Because tshuva requires, among other things, confession. A verbal confession of what you've done, confession to God. And we don't make confession on Rosh Hashanah. So the only way that there could be tshuva to accompany the the shofar Rosh Hashanah is if we do tshuva before. We have to do the tshuva before, so it's in place beforehand. So again, mitzvah tshuva really is central for Yom Kippur. We're doing tshuva before Rosh Hashanah. So we have this idea of preceding the event, our taking the initiative to prepare for the event. That makes it a question of our initiation. Sukkot is the result of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And many who say that the lulav and esrog are like the emblems of someone who's been in a battle, either in a physical battle or in a court battle, and has come out victorious, and these are the symbols of victory. The battle we have been is to deal with our failures of the past and to try to correct them, and we hold these as symbols of the fact that in the battles fought in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, those battles we came out victorious. You finally come to Hanukkah. As you know, the Greeks occupied a large part of Israel, and over a period of time, there were Greek institutions set up. There were Greek schools for children. We even have remains of a Greek translation of the Passover Haggadah, sort of like the Maxwell House Haggadahs. No coffee attached. And to the point where what we would consider abominations were committed in the temple, to the point where the Maccabees led a rebellion, and there was no sign from heaven, and there was no prophecy, and there were no open miracles. Maharal says explicitly that in the whole war there were no open miracles. They simply said, "You've stepped over the red line, we're not taking it. We're not taking it." And they started the war, and as we explained last week or 2 weeks ago, the miracle of the oil embodies the fact that the war was also miraculous, but miraculous in the sense of divine providence that's hidden, what's called a hidden miracle. So there it was definitely our initiation. So the whole of the fall is a matter of our initiation. The whole of the spring is a matter of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's initiation. That's what the Pri Tzaddik says. I'm not able to go any further than that, or any deeper than that. I don't know what else to make out of it, but it's a very interesting idea. They're organizing themes of the events that happen in the holiday, above and beyond just the particular historical events that they commemorate. So there's one other thing I wanted to tell you. I don't remember what I said to. Did I talk to you about 3 stages of receiving the Torah? No, I didn't. I spoke to a different group. So this is the last thing I'll tell you. I mentioned now, which I had mentioned before, that you have with Sinai, and then you have Purim, in which we received it a second time. There's really an in-between. Because in Yom Kippur, after Yom Kippur, Moses came down with the second luchos, with the second tablets. Mm-hmm. Hutner has an essay in which he says there are really 2 worlds. There are 2 worlds. And he's quoting a famous Chazal in the 13 attributes of mercy. There are many different counts, but according to the one that people know, the one that's commonly understood, the name of Hashem appears twice at the beginning, and those are 2 of the 13. And the rabbinic comment is, I am Hashem before the person sins, and I am Hashem after the person sins. Mm. And the name there is a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, which the Ramban says is built on Hey Vav Hey, which is the verb to be. It means he's the one who gives existence, gives being to everything that exists. This is the idea of creator. So said Rav Hutner, these are both names of creation. They're names of a creator who gives existence. And there are 2 of them. And we're being told there's one for before the sin and one for after the sin. That means there must be 2 worlds. Mm. There's a world before the sin, there's a world of after the sin. Mm. And he went and looked for sources of this idea. And they found two concepts of Torah, two concepts of tefillah, of prayer, other matters as well. So it comes out that really there are three givings of the Torah. There's the giving of the Torah at Sinai, which is before the sin of the golden calf. There's the giving of the Torah again on Yom Kippur, which is after the sin of the golden calf. And also, there's a reacceptance of the Torah on Purim. Now, there's a statement by the Gaon of Vilna, which I think is indicative of this. I believe I heard this from my oldest son, who is the tops in many fields, but I heard many things from him. Yom Kippur, receiving the Torah a second time. Kippur is a day of great joy, because Baruch Hu forgave us, and he gave us another set of tablets, which Moses had broken. Joy in the Jewish tradition, Ben Yonah says it, Rashi implies it, joy in the Jewish tradition is expressed by a banquet. Where's the banquet? Where's the Yom Kippur banquet? So the Gaon of Vilna says the Yom Kippur banquet is on Purim. Because Purim is fulfilling that extra element of receiving the Torah, which even on Yom Kippur wasn't there. Because the compulsion of Sinai was still there, and that hadn't been overcome. So that links Yom Kippur and Purim in a very profound way. And then the Tikkunei Zohar, which I told you, because when I was talking about drinking, Tikkunei Zohar, which I told you, now takes on a much deeper effect. Tikkunei Zohar points out that the 10th of Tishrei, Day of Repentance, Day of Atonement, is never called Yom Kippur. In the Torah it's called Yom Kippurim. Kippurim is plural. And there are no vowels in the Torah, so you could re-vowel it by putting another dot under the kaf, vertically below the one that's there, and you get Yom Kippurim, a day like Purim. And then you think, what are you talking about? Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. There's no two polar opposites greater than Yom Kippur and Purim. But now, if you're both times you're celebrating a reacceptance of the Torah, and the two of them, each the one at Yom Kippur has something missing, and Purim fills it in so that they are a joint axis of receiving the Torah, then they're linked in a very profound way, to the extent that the celebration on Purim is the missing missing banquet that should have been dedicated for Yom Kippur. So there are very, very deep themes here. And what I wanted to do today is just to illustrate to you that what we talked about in the in the Megillah and the details of the mitzvahs that we discussed, that's just scratching the surface. It's just scratching the surface. Jewish thought is inexhaustible, and it's unending, and even the simplest things. I discovered looking Rashi yesterday on Shabbos, something which I had never known, that I was mistranslating a pasuk for all the decades because I didn't look at the Rashi. I hadn't read the Rashi. It says this: the cloud is on the Mishkan, the tabernacle, which I translated in all the journeys. But the truth is, that's false. Because if the cloud is on the tabernacle, you don't travel. You stay where you are. So if you look at the Rashi, you see that the word masehem, says Rashi, can refer to encampments also. Because a journey, a multi-day journey, part of the journey is encamping here and then tomorrow morning moving on. Or next week moving on. You're going to move out from the place that you encamp. So Masa in Hebrew, and he quotes several verses, Masa in Hebrew can mean encampments. So the correct translation of that verse is, there's the cloud of glory that was present on the tabernacle in all of their encampments, not all their journeys, not going anywhere when it's on. Others, strictly speaking, it's false. Yeah. Picked that up yesterday. So a lot of people will say, no, welcome to what we learned when we were 10. Good, wonderful. The happy thing is that throughout your life you're still learning. Okay.